to everyone. Welcome to Putting on the Mind of Christ, the inner work of Christianity. It's evening for me now, and tonight, maybe for others, are also in the night, global. So today and tonight I'm going to talk about that on the cross of inner contradictions and the descent into hell. You are so loved with an everlasting love. This is your pastor, Yeti. So it's again a long chapter we're going to go through, but bear with me. It is so interesting, so feeding, so spiritual growth we can experience here. Shortly after breaking through into the causal level, my consciousness was plunged into the dark night of the soul. Bernadette Roberts, an American contemplative housewife and mother who begins her spiritual autobiography at this point, is a helpful guide here. I compare similar experience of Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and Bernadette Roberts with my own, and I note how the gospel crucifixion narratives were deliberately constructed by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John to symbolize the inner spiritual events that take place during this night. A couple months, I'm going to give a part of the biography of Bernadette Roberts. A couple of months after my breakthrough into the causal level of consciousness, as I sat writing at home, a sea of heavy darkness descended upon me. The darkness, though I did not know it then, had been uprooted from the unconscious parts of my astral body by my now total openness to the powerful new light of the causal level. The darkness had come in from the unconscious depths of my soul's other incarnations. The darkness had also come in from that part of the world's negative collective unconsciousness that vibrate at the same dark, heavy level as my own soul's repressed negativity. None of these I knew at the time, only now. In Matthew's crucifixion narrative, this darkness is symbolized by the darkness which fell upon and covered Jerusalem for the 3 hours that Jesus hung on the cross. Matthew 27, verse 45. All the roots of my buried dark side, to use John of the Cross word, were now fully exposed to the light. Their deep sufferings and pain brought into conscious awareness. I'll move on. It is at this point that the contemporary American Catholic laywoman Bernadette Roberts begins her account of her spiritual path. Bernadette, in meditating John of the Cross, cites in the first sentence of her book the path to no self, the traditional threefold map of the Christian spiritual path: the purgative, illuminative, and unitive way. Next, she assumes wrongly that John's efforts to fit his experience into these three parts were successful and constituted an accurate map of the whole path. The night of the senses as the purgatory's way, the period between the nights and the illuminative way and the unitive way following the dark night of the soul. But when she tries to fit her experience into John's version, it doesn't work. She has to admit she's never experienced either the dark night of senses or the period between the nights, the subtle. Finally, she gives up and starts her story, where in fact it started at the beginning of the dark night of the soul. It is amazing Bernadette felt and saw as much as she did as she went through this part of the spiritual path. Well, I say this because by her own report, she had an enormous amount of emotional blockage in her third eye, the center of psychic and spiritual vision. All through the dark night, she had great psychic pain in that center, and that area seems to have completely healed only a couple years before she entered the kingdom of heaven. The level of non-dual consciousness, and we will get there. At that time, her psychic powers finally opened up, but by then, seeing no use for them, she chose to shut them down. Bernadette's account begins when she is 17 years old and apparently living in a convent. Here is her account of the descent of the darkness, or the descendant of the darkness. I had been reading in the garden when I felt an invisible film or thin veil come down over my head and shroud my mind. Instantly, I knew something had happened, but no idea came to mind, nor was there any other response. Swiftly and decisively, all had been done in silence. Yet, however, simple and innocent its quiet descent this act was, or decent this act was, in effect, terrible and awful. The Almighty had simply lowered the boom. In my case, 2 months went by. Then I had a dream in which my guardian angel, a being with great beauty and power and with blazing blue eyes, said goodbye. He also said, with a dazzling, beautiful smile of the deepest love, compassion, gratitude, and satisfaction, "I'll see you later, upstairs." This dream comforted and terrified me. It comforted me because it indicated that, despite the overwhelming darkness I was feeling, I was still on the right path and had somehow evoked the compassion of God and the angel. But it terrified me because I thought the dream might mean I would soon die. Indeed, I felt like I was about to die, even though my common sense and my inner knownness told me that physical death was not imminent. The departure of the guardian angel marks the completion of the individuation process at the level of the soul. Turkom Saraydarian, a devoted of one of the Western esoteric traditions, writes, "The most interesting thing that happens at the fourth initiation is the departure of the guardian angel, the one who guides the steps of the initiated, since the individualization has a human soul, now departed, giving him a chance to delve deeper into the mystery of his own self." Next, I was led to encounter 2 persons. One was a street hustler and the other a very spiritual, evolved person, both unknown to me or even to themselves, harbored strong negative feelings toward me. Ironically, It was the spiritual person who had the energies most antagonistic to me. The energies of these two people began to zap me. When a zapping of this sort is done deliberately by a black magician, a person who uses psychic powers for negative purposes, it is called a psychic attack. It can totally debilitate a person. And we will go there too. In my case, it was not deliberate, but rather deliberately scheduled by God to help and not hurt. Warned by inner psychic alarms, I fled first from one of these people and then from the other. This was a classic subtle level test of energy discernment. We find the motives of this initiatory test in many of the ancient myths. One has to wonder if they were just myths or if they came out of the actual experience of the adepts of the ancient mystery schools and were like Jesus' parables told as stories to the initiated. Conversely, one also has to wonder, given what the psychic initiated experience in this passage, whether the gospel, crucifixion, resurrection narratives are not historical, as I am presuming, but a psychological parable, and if so, what sublime intelligence created that parable? My belief is that both are true, the history and the wondrous parable. To me, that is most awesome of all. When I let go of these two people in the space of 2 weeks, it was the last emotional straw. My psychic could no longer take the strain. One sleepless night, it scattered into what seemed like a million pieces. The literature of the Zen tradition has much to say about this critical point on that path. Like the path I followed, but by different means, the path of Zen seems to increase psychic strain to the point that the old psychic structure held together by the paranoid ego finally snaps and collapses. As Jesus said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Luke 11:17. And he also said, the wheat and weeds, the positive and negative aspects of our spiritualities, have to grow together until the very end, and only at the harvest can the weeds be separated out and burned. Matthew 13:28-30 and verse 40. My story had now entered the harvest time, and the weeds, which had played their legitimate part in the individualization of the soul, were about to transmute it by spiritual fire. With this psychic scattering, I was plunged into the depths of the dark night of the soul. The psychic pain of this was so extreme, I thought I was dying. Much the same happened to Teresa. She appears to have been zapped by the unconscious negative vibrations of another person who had spoken a word to her that's delay. Here is her account in Mansion 6. Well, here is what happens sometimes to a soul that experience these anxious longings, tears, signs, and great impulses that were mentioned. But they are all nothing in comparison with this other experience I'm going to explain. While the soul is going about in this manner, burning up within itself, a blow is felt from elsewhere. The soul doesn't understand from where or how. The blow often comes from a sudden thought or word about death's delay. I said, blow, because it causes a sharp wound. It isn't felt where earthly suffering are felt, but in the very deep and intimate part of the soul. When this sudden flash of lightning reduces the dust, everything it finds is this earthly nature of ours. I saw a person in this condition. Teresa herself, of course, truly she thought she was dying, and this was not so surprising, because certainly there is a great danger of that. There is no real danger of that, but try telling that a psychic person to whom this had just happened, something is definitely dying, but what it is, I don't know any more than Teresa did. Certainly the old man, Adam, the human personality, is dying, and the new man, the Christ self, is being born. But what exactly does that mean? David Sprengler, speaking from within the Western esoteric tradition, says that the human, by a death and rebirth, is now becoming a Superman. As yet, we don't have any vocabulary except metaphor for explaining this event and others that occur at the higher levels of consciousness. St. Paul put the results of this death and rebirth this way. When anyone is joined to Christ, he is a new being. The old has gone, the new has come. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Paul also said, what does matter is being a new creation. Galatians 6:15. That the advent of the Christ self is the next step in human evolution on earth, and that Jesus came to show us the path to it, I have no doubt. Bernadette Roberts also gives a graphic description of this shattering event. The opening up our deepest interior center may be likened to an underground explosion, wherein all parts of being are sent flying out of control and scattered in every direction. Prior to this experience, and by virtue of its strong will, we had fashioned our own unity according to what we knew of its parts, and thereafter held these parts together with the tight reins of self-control. In a word, we were masters of our own house. The entrance into the dark night, however, shatters this man-made unity. From here on, God takes over the reins of control and becomes master of the house. This is how John of the Cross describes the event. The two extremes, divine and human, which are joined here, produces the third kind of pain and affliction the soul suffers at this time. The divine extreme is the purgative contemplation, and the human extreme is the soul, the receiver of the contemplation. Since the divine extreme strikes into order, they renew the soul and divinize it by stripping it of the habitual affections and properties of the old self, to which the soul is strongly united, attached and conformed. It is this entangles and dissolves the spiritual substance, absorbing it in a profound darkness, that the soul, at the sight of its miseries, feels that it is melting away and being undone by a cruel spiritual death. It feels as if it were swallowed by a beast and digested in the dark belly, and it suffers an anguish comparable to Jonas in the belly of the whale. It is fitting that the soul be in this subculture of dark death in order that it attain the spiritual resurrection for which it hopes. For me, this was the most traumatic event of my life. There is no describing the terror. I couldn't imagine what had hit me. In the gospel, crucifixion narrative, and in the creed, the psych-shattering spiritual event is represented by Jesus' death on the cross and his descent into hell. The intensity of suffering in the dark night applies to persons whose souls are making the breakthrough into Christ consciousness for the first time. Those who are born with the Christ consciousness usually have a much easier passage when they recapitulated this transition. So, if you hear all this, I think the experience is really tough, right? It's deep. And we should be very careful if we allow ourselves to enter a particular level in the consciousness of the experience when something happened to us in a dream or during the day. We know that, like our Teresa and John and so many others, like Hildegard von Bingen and name it, they had visions, they saw things, they experienced a higher, also Hildegard von Bingen made beautiful music in such a high tune that it was all hearing like divine music. So the biography and a portion of Bernadette Roberts, I encourage you to find out. Yeah, maybe you can read a book about her. So I give you enough to educate yourself, to pray. Please pray and don't do stupid things. It's always okay to have a longing for education, to have a longing to dig deep in certain things. Your spiritual life is very important, because when you are in Christ, indeed you are a new creation. The old is passed away, the new is come. So from that starting point we move on. But for those who are not Christians, there is another experience where they have a master in yoga, or like in other religions, like in India, name it. We need to be very careful as we open our souls. We need to be very careful. As we mentioned a while ago, when a yoga master said to a student, if you see the Buddha, kill him. So this is a warning that you don't open your mind, your consciousness, to a darkness that will overtake you. So I will stop here, and the next one that we're going to talk about is the resurrection from the dark night. But that is for tomorrow. So let me say to all of you, good night, sleep well. It's a long time since I said that. So I know there is a lot differences in states. So night night, sleep well, and may the Lord bless you and protect you. May He keep you from all harm, and may His light shine upon you. Well, my friends, you are blessed, you know that. Even those who are not even Christians, listen to this. There is a spiritual moving of a higher putting the mind of Christ, putting the mind in the developing of the levels of your consciousness. It's quite excited to listen, to hear what some people experience. And may you have a deeper encounter with our Christ. God bless, and night night. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye.